Okay, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. I'm Jay Warmke with solarpvtraining.com. And the way this thing works is what we're going to do is we do a recap, a brief recap of what's happening in the world of solar for the past week or so. And then we highlight the um, webinars, the conferences, things like that that are coming up. And then we go into a deep dive on a topic that's of interest, at least to me, and hopefully to the general solar industry in general. And this week we're joined today by our special guest who will be discussing essentially why solar is absent in our mainstream culture. So I think that will be an interesting discussion for us all. So let's go ahead and jump into this for the news from the solar industry for the week of February 16th. So it's really pretty much a case of good news, bad news for this week when it comes to all of our news in the world of solar. So let's go ahead and hit the bad or the good news first. The good news first. So anyway, the share of utility scale solar in the U.S. Power generation mix will grow from 5% of the total mix in 2024 to 7% in 2025 and 8% in 2026. This, according to the U.S. Information Administration, the EIA, in its latest forecast. Now, this represents a 45% increase in solar generation here in the U.S. from 2024 through 2026. Now, conversely, the share of natural gas-fired generation is projected to fall here in the U.S. from 43% of the mix. It's still the big dog in the generating mix in 2024, down to 40% in 2025, and then down further to 39% next year. Wind is anticipated to stay relatively stable right at around 11% from last year to this year, then grow about 1% of the mix next year in 2026. And coal, which has really seen a precipitous decline over the last decade or so, still represents about 16% of the generating mix here in the US, and that's expected to stay relatively flat. I think a lot of these coal power plants that were scheduled to shut down, my sense is they're probably going to remain open, largely because there is such a delay in permitting of new systems. 5 years in some areas. So really, while they may want to mothball these systems, they're going to have to keep them open until new forms of energy, primarily wind and solar and battery storage, come online. But that's going to take a while just because of the messed up permitting process. If the trend continues as it's projected, non-fossil fuel generating sources of energy in the U.S. are projected to surpass fossil fuels by the year 2030. And on a related note, EIA is projecting that the U.S. energy-related CO2 emissions, while they will increase slightly this year, they're actually set to decline next year in the U.S. Back to pre-2024 levels. And similarly, we've reported previously that actually globally CO2 level emissions they feel like they've peaked, and that this year will probably be the first year globally that we see CO2 emissions actually decline. So the US is about a year behind the curve there. And in 2024, electric generation from the US power sector grew 3% to meet the growing demand, primarily from data centers, artificial intelligence, the transition to electric vehicles. EIA is expecting this growth rate to continue. They're looking at increasing in 2025 by about 2% again, and then next year by about 1%. I should point out EIA is typically very conservative in their projections. But if we see this continued growth, this will actually mark the first time in the U.S. since 2005 that we've seen 3 years of electrical generation growth here in the U.S. Now, Texas is a good example of this trend where historically ERCOT, which manages about 90% of the Texas power load, has primarily relied on natural gas for all of the generating. But other energy sources like wind and solar have been used to deal with peak demand. But the energy mix is changing, and it's changing very rapidly in that state. In fact, recently, Texas overtook California as the nation's leader in renewable energy installations. Now, while ERCOT did add 3,400 megawatts of natural gas generation, that actually was less than the 4,000 megawatts they added in battery storage capability. And then they also added about 9,700 megawatts of solar and 13,000 megawatts of wind. So, in other words, in 2024, 89% of all of the new generation capacity added in the Lone Star State was from renewable sources last year. Now, if this trend continues over what we've seen for the last 15 to 20 years, generation from fossil fuel sources such as coal and natural gas, well, they've remained fairly stable, with natural gas supplanting coal there, but nearly all of the new generating capacity has come from renewables. And as a result, in 2024, nearly 48% of all of the power used in Texas came from non-carbon emitting sources. Now, several weeks and two separate federal court orders later, now we're into the bad news. State agencies and beneficiaries are still not able to access billions of dollars in renewable energy related federal grants, according to a number of state agencies nationwide, which is why 23 Democrat attorneys general are suing the Trump administration, asking for a judge in Rhode Island to intervene. The motion was filed last Friday with Chief Judge John McConnell Jr. for immediate and emergency enforcement of his existing order that said that the federal government had to stop the funding freeze. Now, McConnell issued a temporary restraining order on January 31st, preventing Trump and other federal cabinet heads from blocking access to funds until further notice. But according to the lawsuit, this restraining order has largely been ignored, and state agencies remain locked out of payment systems and other portals that control billions of dollars in federal funding. Let's see, I'm skipping over a couple of quotes here, but basically, in a court document submitted on February 3rd, Daniel Shui, I believe is how you pronounce his name, the U.S. Department of Justice's attorney that's representing the Trump administration, wrote that the administration did not interpret the judge's restraining order as applying to Trump's executive orders. They also felt that the administration the restraining order did not apply to monies from the Inflation Reduction Act or the Infrastructure Improvement and Jobs Act. So the lawsuits continue. And actually, last week, federal judge in D.C. issued another restraining order for the same thing, essentially, that was filed by nonprofits and business groups. And then last week, Pennsylvania sued the federal government, claiming that Pennsylvania agencies were being locked out of about $3 billion in renewable energy funding. And other issues in this same vein, the already glacial permitting process for large renewable energy projects to get permission to connect to the grid perhaps just got slower, according to the American Clean Power Association. President Trump's day one executive order that put a 60-day freeze on the final decisions for renewable projects that were on federal lands has also ground key permitting work to a halt as well. Now, we did discuss this earlier where said, okay, well, how many of these projects are actually on federal land? It will affect offshore wind turbines, of course, but the large solar projects may not be affected. Well, it turns out that the Army Corps of Engineers has to sign off on all of these projects, basically saying that they're not going to be impacting the provisions in the Clean Water Act, so for wetland permits. So even on private land or state lands, these projects still need to go to the federal government and get permission to operate, and many times these have no wetlands at all. It's just always been a perfunctory thing where you go in and they say, yeah, you're not affected, go ahead. Well, it turns out now that the districts within the Army Corps of Engineers that do this permitting have essentially been shut down, or given different marching orders. The at least two of the districts within the Army Corps of Engineers have indicated that they will no longer be issuing what are called jurisdictional determinations. That are JDs. Usually the developer just goes in and gets a JD issued from them saying that there are no wetlands, there are no bird nests available on the site that would cause them to have a problem. But they're saying that now the Army Corps is saying these are optional, and that they're not going to be issuing them. Well, the problem there is that the developers are saying, okay, well, you're saying they're optional, but they've always been required. And if we try and proceed without these things, are we going to then have this thing overturned or delayed in the future as we proceed? So it's all up in limbo. And then the Army Corps has said, well, we are also uncertain if the funding will be there to actually pay for these people who issue the permits. So kind of a mess. We'll see how that all lays out, but that's the news that I've compiled here from the solar industry for this week. Does anyone who's online have anything that they'd like to add to the good news, bad news there? Give you just a second. And while you're doing that, I'm going to jump into the events that are coming up, the announcements and the like. So what we have is going to just adjust my screen so I can see it a little better. On February 19th, which is tomorrow, there'll be a webinar on solar on metal roofs, 2 p.m. And as I mentioned, usually every time, I'm not going to give you the links for these things. There's this thing called Google. You can actually look them up, but at least you are aware that these things exist. On the 19th, there's another one on job site documentation. There's on the 25th, there's going to be a webinar through Solar Power World on solar tax credits, the domestic content in specific. That's been an issue that's been confusing to many. Then Intersolar is going to be taking place in San Diego, February 25th through the 27th. That's an in-person conference. 26th, hail and solar panels. That's a big issue down in Texas for sure. Some other places in the Midwest. And then March 4th, we have solar layouts done right. I think this is primarily for utility scale projects, but you can join in there if you're so inclined. And March 6th is CPS, their 250 kW inverter. I suspect this is all about, it's going to be a sales presentation, but it's all about their features. And if you're looking for a very large system, that might be the one for you to at least see what they have to offer. And then there's a wind and solar finance conference coming up in Phoenix, March 16th through the 19th. Another conference, Distributech, is coming up in Dallas, the 24th through the 27th. The NABCEP conference at the same time, that's going to be in Reno, Nevada. And as I've mentioned a few times, this conference typically sells out. There's limited space. So if you're wanting to go there, this is more for installers. And then the Clean Power Conference in Phoenix coming up in May. And then, of course, our shameless plug for the various workshops that we have coming up in person or online. Those are there at solarpvtraining.com, and our books. And that is the events. Anybody have anything they want to throw into the mix as well there? Give you guys, you're all so shy here today. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into our topic, and hopefully this is going to generate some conversation here, because I think I find it fascinating, and I think it's one of those things. I'll admit for myself, it's something that you don't notice till you notice. It's like the yellow Volkswagen kind of thing, until you're thinking about them, you don't realize how many of them are running around. Well, this is basically, why is popular culture ignoring solar? And our guest today is Tor Valenza. Hopefully, did I give the emphasis properly? Valenza, and the founder of UnThink Solar PR and Communications. So, Tor, welcome aboard. So, if you could, I'll just introduce too. We will talk about, you've got a a podcast online thing. I guess your attempt to try and bring solar into our culture. This is called Probably True Solar Stories, and I'm sure we'll touch on that as well. But for right now, Tor, how about if you introduce yourself, give us a little bit about your background and what brings you here today?
Thanks, Jay. I appreciate you having me on, and it's great to see some familiar faces here as well that I've met over the years. I am Tor Valenza. A lot of people in the solar industry know me as Solar Fred because I was one of the solar pioneers of Twitter. And at that time, I couldn't fit Tor Valenza. And so I decided to go buy a solar something. And solar Tor, I knew wouldn't make sense to people. And again, I'm in PR and branding and all this other stuff. So I just picked Fred as a fun name. It just stuck. And there's actually some background about why I picked Fred, but I won't go into that now. Um, and so, yeah, I've been doing PR and communications in the solar world since then. Um, but before that, I was actually a film and TV writer. So if there are any Stargate SG-1 fans out there, Dharma and Greg, The Dead Zone, a couple other things, and a lot of films that never got made because that's the way Hollywood is. But uh, when I was a kid, I was always fascinated by solar. And then I took physics and calculus, and I realized I wasn't going to become a solar engineer. So I had that, little brief stint as a film and TV writer for about 20 years. And then I saw a double feature of An Inconvenient Truth and Who Killed the Electric Car. And at that time, there was a writer's strike going on. And I said, you know what? I want to, we don't need another engineer. We need better communicators. And so I started blogging about what was wrong with PR and communications in the solar world. And I was on Renewable Energy World for a long time and started my business. And since then, things have been going really well for solar. I won't take credit for that. I'm just saying that the industry grew. But what I noticed was that in film and TV, it was not growing. By 2020, we had 3.5 million solar installations in the US. And I dare anybody to think about the last time they saw a solar installation on film or television, or even featured a solar installer in some kind of way. So I kind of reached back into my film and TV background and started a podcast, which is relatively inexpensive, called Probably True Solar Stories. And it's an anthology series. And, I just started writing solar fiction. And then at the end, in the show notes, there's always the true solar takeaways that separate the solar fiction from the solar facts in the stories, and everything else.
Well,
So
when I was looking at your website, and I know a lot of your stories there focus on solar as a feature of the story. Like the person
absolutely.
is a solar installer, or it's taking place at a solar installation or something. It's a character in the story. But I guess before we get into some of that, I'm just curious because I honestly never thought about this until I read your article in the ACES magazine. And I never thought about the fact that it's not even a backdrop article, set staging. A lot of these shows are filmed in California, and California just has solar like everywhere. So they probably got to be going out of their way not to show solar in the background of these scenes. Like Bonanza's filmed in Colorado or in California for, you see the surrounding countryside. It seems like you should see solar installations just on houses.
Yeah, and I think that that's the issue is that it's one of those things where um, they, Hollywood has just seen it as a distraction rather than a feature, and so they want normal. They don't want to draw attention to it for the particular plots and everything else. But the truth is, that we're in the middle of this energy transition, just the way we were in a transition from horses and buggies to cars, from big mainframe computers to um, PCs, and from landlines to cell phones. And in each of those transitions, pop culture has followed those major things. If you think about, again, in the cars, the silent movies were filled with car culture and Charlie Chaplin films and all the things that went wrong with that. If you look at, the 1970s and early 80s, you had, war games and all these other movies that were about, kids adopting computers and things like that. And in the same thing, in the late 90s, when cell phones started becoming popular, you had again, things like The Matrix, where you had that flip phone, and you had Tom Cruise in saying "Show me the money," and I'm blanking on that film, Jerry Maguire,
Yeah.
and all that, and that was all a big thing. And there were a bunch of these kind of cell phone related movies coming on, and then it became, a regular part of not being it. So Hollywood needs to catch up to these things, and it so far what it's been trying to do, and failing, is climate change related um, films and things, and
Yeah. Unless
um,
they're disaster movies, unless they're, all of a sudden New York City is being covered by a tidal wave or something.
yeah, and most of them are, gloom and doom kind of stuff,
Yeah.
which I don't think helps actually in terms of the energy transition, and encouraging people to go solar.
Well, do you think it's maybe not as nefarious where, like you mentioned cell phones? To me, because the technology changes so much, it dates a movie pretty quick to see them with the clunky old 5 pound cell phone, like Magnum PI pulling it out of his car or whatever.
Yeah.
And then the flip phones and then smartphones and who knows what's going to be next. So you can kind of go, geez, that's like a 30-year-old movie or a 40-year-old movie because of the technology. Do you think they're kind of saying, okay, this is one of those things that might date our movie, so we can avoid it? Or is
Well,
it just something that they just don't even think about?
I, I think right now it's something that they don't even think about. I think, if you look at solar technology that is displayed, it's usually in a sci-fi film or something like that, or someone just mentioned The Walking Dead,
Mhm.
some kind of disaster thing, and it's, much more of an oversight. There are a few films that have it. Usually it's portrayed inaccurately. Sahara is a Matthew McConaughey film that had a concentrated solar um, power thing, back all the way back to James Bond in The Man with the Golden Gun.
Mhm.
You had a concentrated PV technology that created a laser ray gun. Um, the Martian is a good example of something that did show it well, but that whole book and that whole series was all about trying to be accurate, about everything. So that was great, but it's rare. And again, The Martian is also science fiction and takes care, and takes place in the future. What I'm trying to encourage filmmakers to do, you know and Hollywood in general, is to show solar as contemporary, the same way that it's starting to do with electric vehicles now, because that's again something that they're advertising. But we as an industry don't have enough resources and money to be doing that Got Solar campaign that everybody's been trying to do for years and years and years and years. Because we just don't have the lobbying money yet, even though we're, you know, globally a multi-hundred billion, if not $1 trillion industry right now, or maybe clean energy is. I think, and that includes, unfortunately, nuclear, if you're totaling up that investment dollars. But
Right.
which I think everybody on this Zoom is probably knows that that's not going to overtake solar, at least in cost and
Right.
deployment.
So
Um,
is this something then you've identified this issue? And like I said, it's something I had never even given a thought to, which is probably part of the problem. So you say, okay, so what can we do about it? Is it something that's causing a problem? It's an absence, but is that absence causing us harm within the industry and within society in general? And is there something we can, I mean, not all of us are living in Hollywood and writing films, but
right.
so
So yeah, and neither am I anymore. I'm up in the San Francisco Bay Area. However, um, so the answer to your question is yes. It definitely its absence is not helping accelerate the transition. If you think of other career-oriented shows that are doctor shows and lawyer shows and things like that, a lot of times that inspires people to pursue the law or being a doctor or whatever that is. And as people probably know here, we have a dearth of electricians and solar installers and at least at this point. And so we need those kind of examples in contemporary stories to, I think, inspire people for workforce development to catch up. Because again, out of sight, out of mind. Yeah, so, and I think it would be, great for us to, not only have more solar in film and TV and solar related to characters, but, also in games and video games and things like that. So also music, which again, part of Probably True Solar Stories is again to create this pop culture thing. And so when AI music came along, again, there are very few songs. There are a few, and they're in the podcast show notes where some solar installers have created some solar music, but in general, it has not. So I created 3 contemporary songs to show that it is possible and it's fun.
yeah. Well, I
But
was
the
trying to think about it because, I'm immersed in solar, as are you and a lot of the folks here on the call. But it's kind of like not very dramatic, It's like it's background stuff. It's electricity,
but but
but
it's
I'm thinking I was trying to think, where could this be central to something? And it feels like there's a lot of these prepper type shows. There's a lot of these living in the frontiers.
yeah.
I don't know that they ever get into solar per se, I mean, I don't know.
Again, yeah, reality shows are great, but the other aspect
No,
that
no, no, back up. Reality shows aren't great, they're
well,
everywhere, but they're kind of dumb.
what I
So
meant is they're popular, and they bring a lot of attention to things. But the other thing that I was going to say that the absence of solar in pop culture is affecting is politics and public support for renewable energy and things like
yeah,
that. Again, one of the more popular shows right now is Landman, which is all about the oil industry, and the bull crap that it is uh, talking about in terms of the carbon footprint of wind towers and all these other things that is not true, and waste and all that. It just goes by. So politics in terms of public support and regulations and everything else that we need, for voters to be wanting to support this energy transition. That's why another reason why pop culture
sure.
or I should say, solar needs to be in pop culture. So, what probably in terms of your other question about, well, solar is boring. I think, most doctor visits are just a checkup and a conversation. Most lawyer stories are people yelling in the phone at each other and talking and looking at a contract. So solar and, lawyer stories, doctor stories, and dragon stories are all about people and the challenges that they have and dramatizing those challenges. So if you look at my podcast, one of the stories that, it's an anthology series, but I personally like solar noir. So, kind of mystery and thriller type of things. So there's a story there that's called The Solar Heist, and it's a long 11 episode um, storyline about someone who has a utility solar installer who has his solar panels get confiscated, again, drawn from the headlines because of forced labor issues,
Uh-huh.
through no fault of his own, because his exporter screwed him. And so he hires a guy who knows a guy, and they liberate those panels, but it spins out into a much deeper, longer twist and turn, kind of solar noir type of thing. The heist happens actually in episode two, but there are a lot of ramifications for that. There's
Well,
also
that's probably why you're the screenwriter and not me, because I would.
Well,
Uh-huh.
again, you can put anybody, as long as it's some kind of world that you know and familiar with and the
Sure.
details, you can do a lot of things. Another one that I did is, Winnie the Pooh goes solar with Tigger being the installer, and of course you can, that one is for kids, and it's definitely edutainment, trying to teach them and parents about that. There's another one that is again is drawn from the solar bro culture of an elderly person who is getting um, a bad solar quote from these solar bros. And so, there's what she's insistent on going solar, and this guy is telling her and explaining why her house is not right for solar. And so you're
Hmm.
learning about, why all these high pressure sales tactics, and about these, I should say, sales tactics, and when your roof is, and in her case, she has trees, she's got a lot of electrical services that need to be upgraded and all these other things, and yet she's insisting that this guy give her a bid, and he refuses to do it. So it's
I,
a fun.
I wanted to kind of shift just slightly because in looking at your website and everything, I see that your day job per se is dealing with solar installers or solar companies and trying to help them brand themselves and market themselves. And I think that sort of this is part of that as an industry. We're not very well branded and we're not good at
Oh,
paying off politicians and things of that nature.
paying off, contributing to their causes that support
Right.
all.
Uh-huh. But I'm just wondering what common advice or what common issues do you see when you go out there and you talk about how should you set yourself up in the marketplace?
Yeah.
What are the things that you're running into?
So I think, what's universal, and again, I'm telling probably true solar stories, i.e., fictional. But the truth is that we all have a lot of customer stories, and people, again, follow other examples. So testimonials and telling your successful solar installation stories are always important, not only for your business, again, but also for politicians. And the themes that we have around solar are all worthy of storytelling, whether that's successfully lowering your electric bill, or feeling energy independence, or I haven't written the prepper one, but I could, in terms of that story of feeling, getting off grid. Um, so I think, everybody has nonfiction storytelling stories in their daily solar lives. And even in the sense of a picture and people, smiling in front of their solar installations, that alone is a story, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I think we don't um, uh, focus on that enough because we have so many other things to do. So in terms of, again, a tagline and a brand, and all these things, they're super important because it stays with people and it helps you to refer, get referrals and things like that because people remember you for your tagline. So does that answer? your
Yeah,
question?
I'm thinking as you were speaking on that. I mean, every company has certain truisms they can do about getting their name out there and presenting a positive image and giving something to remember. As an industry, some of the things people bring up here online, and we've had some of that discussion today about misinformation that's out there being spread. When you're talking about, it might be wind turbines kill whales in Iowa or whatever, or that the farmers are very against solar because they leach asbestos and
Yeah, yeah,
cadmium into the soil, even though typically not true. But also their fertilizers and their insecticides are just dumping gallons of this stuff onto their farm. So they're sudden environmentalists, and or the door knockers who are out there, the aluminum siding sales guys who are giving the industry a bad name. So how do we brand our industry? I mean, what can each of us individually do, but what should we be doing as an industry to try and get over some of this? Because like as Mark Twain said, a lie can get halfway around the world while the truth's still putting on his shoes.
yeah,
It's difficult to outpace these interesting stories about wind turbines killing whales, and
yeah.
it,
Again, it's wonderful, being in the industry since 2009 to see solar in the news a lot more often. And so I think that's part of it, is continuing to have those myth busting stories being portrayed in the larger media, but also social media. I think you every what I like to say is that every solar installer has a satellite truck in their pocket today. You really can broadcast these short, small solar stories that help these causes. So if you bring your cell phone camera to a meeting, a permitting meeting of some sort, and interview people there, about the issues that are going on, you'll bust a lot of myths right there, and then broadcast that again just to social media, from Facebook to TikTok and all these other things. We just have to learn how to use these tools a little better. And the tools that are out there right now are so much easier, especially now with the dawn of AI, to take that and grab those videos and cut them down very quickly into something that's share worthy and hopefully will be spread among the community about things, especially when they're hot button issues locally.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
maybe we
that
just need to get Taylor Swift to put solar panels on her house and
we do. Actually, there are
do a
many
video in
stars.
front of it.
I've tracked this for a long time. There are many stars that have gone solar.
Mhm.
Um, and it's one of those things where they mention it. But again, I think it needs to be in literally popular culture. We need to get a show like Landman, the equivalent of that, on the solar side of things, so that it makes people start thinking about the conversation of a permitting meeting, of getting through the AHJs and the CPUC, and sorry, the PUCs, the Public Utility Commissions. I'm in California, so I said CPUC. But yeah, it's people don't understand energy right now. They just understand plugging in their electric vehicle if they have one. But nobody understands that if you do that at the office, that you're going to get the owner is going to get a demand charge if you do it at the wrong time. Energy is complicated, but I think the other side makes it really simple. It's all around us, and you've been using it for 100 years, and you gas up, and that's all you got to worry about, and you pay your utility bill. So there's a lot of solar education that needs to be happening there, and because as good as ASIS is doing, and as well as SEIA is doing, and all the other Vote Solar and all the other ones that I support, it's still not enough. And we've got to find the right messaging that breaks through the public's perception about what we're doing and why it's important.
Yeah, we need our own drill, baby, drill, right? So I'll let you work on that one, right? We can
Well, I mean, in all seriousness, what is solar's hashtag? We don't have one. I'm
right.
I'm trying to make it, solar is life or solar is now. But that means that, there's got to be, that got milk style campaign
Shine,
around
baby,
it.
shine. Yeah,
But
yeah. Well, maybe we can get Sarah Palin to be our spokesperson. That would be fun.
I
That's
hope not.
no.
Although, I mean, even though, that would be a great turnaround, actually, people wouldn't take her
Got her
seriously.
own baggage. Yep.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah.
well, let me throw this open to see if anybody online has any questions for you, Tor, or any comments as we've been doing this. Everybody's been so polite and quiet there. So, does anybody have anything they'd like to add or ask?
Uh, yeah, it looks like there's,
Some
don't forget
chats.
about dramatic potential of solar thermal. Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, all those things, solar hot water, what the old solar pioneers said that solar was about hot showers and cold beer in the fridge. And that's true, but we've got to again show that. What what else is in the chat here? Like plumbing, not too entertaining unless, of course, it doesn't work. From the standard playbook, can solar be sexy? Funny. Yes. Go to Probably True Solar Stories and you can see examples of how it can be funny and sexy and all these other things. I think, again, this is all about people, no matter what their profession is. And so it's about conflicts and challenges, and solar can be actually, kind of in the background. I mean, a customer story in solar is the same thing as a customer story in plumbing. And you get into things.
Well,
And
yeah, that just reminded me of that old movie Moonstruck, where one of the characters was a plumber and they
right,
integrated that into the story, but it was definitely not a big part of it, but it was I mean those so I guess how do you I guess it has to start with the person writing the screenplay or something,
yeah,
at that.
yeah. And
So
I'm working on it, but I mean, like, people say, well, you can't. I was kind of frustrated by dragons have more attention in pop culture than solar does, and dragons aren't even real. So I made a solar dragon story that's about our modern world and how it's powered by dragon fire that are boiling the kettles, and how solar is going to replace that. So that's a fun one. But I also do, again, I love these, kind of solar noir stories. So, again, drawn from the headlines. So a terrorist tried to take down the grid by shooting out some transformers. So what if some kids were there when that happened, and that one guy with the shotgun started chasing after them, and they defeat him with a smart solar home by turning off the lights and things like that, and turning on power and things like that when they draw them into the home, and he gets beaten in the end. I mean, there's just a lot of fun things that you can do with the reality of solar. It's just you've got to put it in context, and it can happen.
mhm. Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, somebody had sent up a message there that we are sidestepping something, and I was actually trying to look at the chat because I rarely do while we're doing this. So, if you've got a question or something that we're ignoring, just jump in and jump on. You can be a star. You can be a solar star out here.
Please.
So, but given that folks are quiet, I think we're coming to the end of our time here anyway. Tor, did you have anything you wanted to add before we call it a day?
Yeah, I would just say for everybody to use their creativity to promote solar, whatever that means. If that means a solar sculpture, or that means a solar song, or that means a solar dance. I mean, people are very creative in their personal lives, And when they think about it, they can, I mean, that can be a solar short story is very easy. Um, so, do those things. Do your little mini documentaries, which everybody can do now with a solar with their cell phones. Um, the more that people do it, the more content is out there that could go viral and start and spark things. And I think we don't have to wait for Hollywood to do it. We just need to each, take our own creativity, and we can do it ourselves. So I hope you all will do that in some way.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, we're each of us, because we're so interested in solar, we're kind of ambassadors to the industry. And I guess, and a lot of us do this all the time, when you hear misinformation out there about solar, just respond to it and say, hey, you know
Yeah,
what? That's not the information I have. Or people say solar won't work. And I just say, well, you know what? I haven't had an electric bill in 9 months. So I guess it works for me. I don't know what you're doing that's wrong, but whatever. And you just, rather than, I mean, people, a large number of folks who are very positively loud are usually completely and totally uninformed and don't want to know any different. So you're not going to convince them, but there occasionally, if you just sort of take it from a non-confrontational way and say, hey, that might have been true 10 years ago, but the industry's changed a lot. When we hear these things about solar's too expensive, or, the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine and all of that kind of thing, say, you know what? But we kind of moved on from that. And now we've got some solutions for that. So, yeah, worth
I like
if
to
they're
say,
interested.
when people say that solar isn't reliable, I say that, if you look up into the sky, um, whatever in space, yeah, all those satellites are powered by solar, not by nuclear, not by gas, not by anything else, and they're staying up there because solar and batteries work, and if they didn't, NASA wouldn't rely on them, and you wouldn't have the technology that you have right now in many cases. So solar definitely is reliable, and yeah, especially with batteries, which are all improving and getting better and better.
Mhm.
Um, anyway,
Okay,
so
okay. All right. Well, Tor, I appreciate your visiting us and bringing this up. And I'll just
thanks
say
for
that
having me
we'll,
on.
yep, we'll call it a day. And I invite everybody to join again next Tuesday. All right. Thanks, everybody.